Thank you for watching NTD Business. Coming up tonight, the U.S. economy grows for the first time this year. But does it mean we're no longer facing a recession? We have analysis. The International Energy Agency lays out its plan to hit net zero emissions by 2050. It wants to double investment in renewable energy from $2 trillion to $4 trillion. And shares of tech giant Meta plunging today. What's behind it? That and much more coming up on NTD Business. Great to have you with us. Don Ma here. With the midterm election just less than 2 weeks away, today we take a look at how inflation, the number one issue on voters' mind, is impacting who Americans are going to vote for. Zachary Goldman reports.
My cell phone is disconnected because I can't pay the bill.
Well, there's a lot of struggles going on now in this country with the food.
It's outrageous on all the prices.
These are the voices of struggling Americans just 2 weeks ahead of decisive congressional midterm elections, and they reflect the bitter toll of higher prices for groceries, gas, and rent, brought on by what Reuters polling has found to be the number one issue facing voters, inflation.
The everyday necessities that people take for granted, you can't afford them anymore. And when you're stuck with nothing, what do?
Chrissy Zeffield is a 38-year-old mother of three.
Oh.
She is between jobs and sleeping in her friend's basement. Amid these hard times, she compares them to memories of better days under a Republican president.
Our gas prices were down, food costs were great, shelves were actually stocked in the grocery stores.
Record inflation has undermined Democratic President Joe Biden's approval ratings, and Democrats are worried they could see Republicans take over both chambers of Congress in November. Daniel Ferrales is a 72-year-old retiree. He told Reuters he now regularly collects groceries from a Chicago food pantry, something that began during the pandemic and now persists because of inflation. He said he's planning to vote for a Democrat in November and worries what Republicans might do if they control Congress.
There's nothing wrong with the Republicans, but they don't seem to be wanting to give up anything. They just seem to want to keep it off for themselves.
No, it's kind of hard, but we make do with it.
Chanel Davis is a 46-year-old who cares for both her children and grandchildren. She spoke to Reuters at a free clothing giveaway in Chicago. Her granddaughter was able to find a pair of second-hand sneakers.
And my grandbaby was happy for her little pair of shoes. And she's on the phone with her mother now saying, "Look what I got, Mommy, look what I got."
Davis is undecided about how she'll vote, but she understands it's her responsibility to cast a ballot and make her voice heard.
Get out there and vote, everybody.
But Zeffield, who calls herself a political conservative and lives in a swing district, told Reuters she's unlikely to vote. She has other priorities. Right now, she is saving what little money she has to put toward car insurance, a new tire, and a tank of gas to drive and see her kids, who are living with their father.
I can't even pick them up to take them for ice cream. Just something as small as that. I miss them so much.
New U.S. GDP numbers out today. The U.S. economy grew 2.6% in the third quarter. A large part of the growth was because we exported more than we bought from other countries. Think energy exports to Europe. But today's reports show domestic demand was the weakest in 2 years. Final sales to private domestic purchasers edged up only 0.1%. This is the slowest rise since the second quarter of 2020. Today's GDP offered evidence that the economy is not in a recession, but some analysts warn that the risks of a downturn have increased as the Fed doubles down on rate hikes. But there's also a chance the Fed could get more dovish after this report. Earlier today, I talked to a market expert and got his take on the number. And joining us here is Jim Urio. He's the managing director at TJM Institutional Services. Now, Jim, on the GDP numbers today, is this something to celebrate?
No, I don't think it is. This was a really interesting number because if you look at the headline, 2.6 was higher than expected and takes us out of those string of negative GDP numbers that we had that were insinuating that we're in some sort of recession. Now, if you dig down into this number and you teased out exports, government spending, and inventories and got down to what we call the final sales to private domestic purchasers, that part of the number is almost zero, is up 0.1. Now, when I first started looking at it, I was like, is this just a classic example of someone trying to tease the number to get the conclusion that they thought ahead of time? which is because I do think we're in a slowdown, possibly even coming into recession. But then I realized that the bond market agrees with me. The initial reaction in the Fed funds curve was going into the number. We were pricing in a 75 basis point hike at the November meeting, and then a 50-50 chance of either a 50 or 75 basis point hike at the December meeting. After the number, the chances of just a 50% hike at the December meeting went up to 60%. So even the bond market looked at that number and thought it was a case for the Fed being a little dovish, not hawkish. So the bond market thought that number wasn't very good either.
And this number, is it an indicator of strength or weakness in the economy?
So I think ultimately it's an indicator of current mild strength, but an indication of future weakness. And that's just to be expectable when you think of how quickly rates have gone up and how the lag effect of rates is going to happen. Another point I'd like to point out too is that the trade part of it, the export part of it was extremely strong and accounted for most of the 2.6 gain. And when you look at the way the dollar has increased over the last year, you have to think that there's an expiration date on that strength, and that will quickly soon come out of it because of the dollar strength.
Although Biden says that this is further evidence that our economic recovery is continuing to power forward. What's your reaction to that?
I think, he's a politician. Politicians have to say what they say. But the reality is this, is that everybody who trades and everybody who understands economics knows that there's a tremendous lag effect to rate hikes or rate eases for that matter. So if we agree that the lag effect is 6 to 9 months, and we also agree that the Federal Reserve is going to keep tighten until they see definitive evidence that they've slowed down demand enough to control inflation, that will mean almost by definition that they have gone too far, or that they got to the right level of hikes 6 months before that current condition. So for him to say that it looks like things are all rosy, I think is disingenuous. Again, politicians say what they say, but I think when you think of the lag effect of rate hikes, and all you have to do is look into the real estate market and think about mortgages going from under 3% to over 7%, essentially 10 months' time, that's going to take a long time to have an effect, but it's going to have a profound effect and put a slowdown into the real estate market. And then you extend that to all other sectors, and that's what we're going to see in the next couple of quarters.
Now, I understand you own a restaurant in Illinois. I want to know, what are your customers, how are they feeling about the economy?
This is interesting because, and I have friends in the restaurant business as well too, and the restaurant business is still doing pretty well. I think after the situation we've had over the couple of years where people were locked down and people were denied experiences, that people are willing to borrow and spend, and credit card spending is going up, personal savings rate is going down. Our restaurant is an upscale pub, so I think if like the McDonald's model is that no matter where the economy goes, we kind of fit in there somewhere. But somewhat what we're seeing, I believe, is people, foot traffic being the same, but people making different decisions and starting to spend less money per visit, which it just begun in the last couple of weeks, but it's something I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on.
Do you feel a recession is still on the table?
I think a recession is imminent. I believe that it almost has to happen because the Fed is not going to stop until they see inflation crater. And really the only way I think that resolves itself is by destroying demand enough that brings us into a recession.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim. Pleasure having you on today.